to share some reflections on African Black History Month for a variety of reasons. This is also the 6th year of the United Nations designated International Decade for People of African Descent. How many of us remember that? And we're in the 6th year, right? It's 2015 to 2024, right? So before I start, so I make sure I'm clear on what I said and I don't get accused of anything, I'm taping myself right? Out of habit, right? Because part of the presentation I'd like to share is going to be to actually share around a couple of materials. One of them starts with St. Croix Heritage Trail. This is a publication that we've been trying to redo and it just hasn't happened yet, but it's actually very informative on all things St. Croix. And a number of persons have not had the joy and privilege of seeing it, right? However, if you really want to understand St. Croix, you really need to do it primarily by foot. And that's just the honest truth. You can do 4x4 to a certain point, but you want to do a lot of it by foot so you can actually see things. So I'm going to pass this around for people to see. So part of the conversation when we talk about African Black History Month, I always like to start at the beginning, right? So Dr. Carter G. Woodson, the second African American to ever earn a PhD from Harvard University, actually as part of his dissertation, started this whole concept of Negro History Week. And then it grew into Negro History Month. And then it ballooned into Black history. You hear African American. And sometimes when we say African American, people feel that that's only the 4 to 8 contiguous states. And as those of us that know geography, North Pole, South Pole, Western Hemisphere. So then it's very inclusive, yes? So we spent a significant amount of time when we talk about African Black History Month to make it that much of a balloon and to let it envelope in that particular context. So part of what I'd like to share is that particular point, so that our perspective on how we see it is that inclusivity as well as that diversity and the equity that comes in that conversation. The other part that was very interesting when we tie it to where we are here on II, St. Croix, Belgian Islands, is to speak about resilience. So a lot of times when persons talk about African Black history, they kind of stop at this starting point that really is the starting point. And they speak from colonization, enslavement forward, instead of speaking of the spaces of sovereignty, civilization building, and spiritual attunement that really go beyond, like, for millennia upon millennia upon millennia. So that's how for those that don't know me, I'll just explain. So that's like the construct in which I come and present in that regard. So I'm also going to share with you, so that while I'm speaking, you'll get an idea. This is a map that is part of the St. Croix Maroons Sanctuary. And when we speak of the St. Croix Maroons Sanctuary, most persons think of only on or about maybe 5,000 acres in the northwestern quadrant of St. Croix. Well, in actuality, there were Maroon encampments. They weren't settlements, because that's the whole thing. Maroons kept running, right? But there were these various spaces that Maroons would reside to rest overnight, to gather resources and foods, to meet and strategize on escapes for others and that were enslaved in that period. And you'll notice that the green circles are the areas that we've been able to find footprints. So we've been able to work with a number of entities. And why isn't this? There's another reason. We used to have, we made about 10,000 several years ago. Some of the information has to be updated. This was actually done by a partnership with St. Croix Environmental Association, Succeed, which is St. Croix Unified for Culture, Community, Environment, and Economic Development, and VISHA, the Virgin Islands Social History Associates. And now the VICCC is really working to do a new version so we can also have it digitized with QR codes, etc. So people can just kind of go to the pin areas and get information. So I'd like you to kind of peruse through that while I'm speaking. You can tell that I do this lecture a lot, so I always have literature. So the other part is that we had a publication done that again was commissioned by Succeed. And this was part of a project so that we could actually talk about the Maroon sanctuary lands in a space of preservation, in a space of cultural, historic energy that needs to be respected. We had a number of students that came from various gymnasiums and universities out of Denmark. And when they were coming, their had no idea of the role of the Danish government, the Danish royal government, more specifically on their role in the colonization. You know, all they knew is that they were here, they had insurance companies, they did development, and they did wonderful architecture. So it's going to these spaces in the maritime Maroons areas in St. Croix that we started to be able to find out more information that almost all of the significant historical architecture that's done here on St. Croix, as well as St. Thomas, as well as St. John, even Water Island and other little keys, were done by African architects, by African designers. And we have many of their names, and some of their names are in here. So this particular publication is called Maritime Maroons from St. Croix to Puerto Rico, and it speaks of a period of 1734 to 1848. Quiz, 1848 is?
Emancipation.
There we go, at least we're on the same page. So for VI emancipation, so we're talking on or about the years when the Danes more formally established their presence here in the Virgin Islands, and on or about the year, well, actually a couple of months after the VI emancipation of 1848, July 3rd. So we wanted, in this publication, it actually provides some of the names, some of the protocols that were put in place, some of the laws that were put in place. So persons can actually, I'm going to use this one. In 1733, Denmark acquired the island of St. Croix from France for the purpose of establishing a sugar colony based on African enslavement that would enrich the Danish national economy and enhance Denmark's claim to great power status. That in of itself is self-explanatory of what transpired here, which is an integral part of this narrative when we talk about African Black history in this space called St. Croix. So this one, all I need are emails, and I can send you the PDF of that one because we don't have any printed copies. But I wanted to kind of highlight two other things. I spoke of resilience. You had to be resilient to be able to endure those types of activities, those types of challenges, and to still sustain some aspect of your humanity. Some people now, like after a hurricane, we're like traumatized. So think of the hurricane of that engagement of colonization and enslavement, and what type of trauma that puts actually into the essence of your DNA, right? And just in your mindset on what things that you prioritize, like food. So like agriculture is very, very important. In these Maroon sanctuary lands, you will see footprints of places where people actually developed terrace gardens. So in the midst of escape, they were still making sure that they could eat. In the midst of escape, they were still making sure that they were able to develop weaponry if they needed to defend themselves. In the midst of escape, these very resilient, powerful ancestors were able to start to develop different skills and design facilities that could hide them, whether it was a cave or if it was to actually create a boat of some sort to get on the water, to be able to go to other islands where in certain periods of time, it was something as simple as accepting a particular faith, in this case Catholicism. If they could get to Puerto Rico, if they could get to Vieques or whatever, they were able to just commit to Catholicism and be free. Very interesting kind of history, and all of this is centered around that space that we refer to as the Maroon sanctuary lands. So I wanted to kind of keep that in the journey. So I'll give the third point in terms of having people come to these heritage sites, be able to understand the legacy of the power in people and in this human space, right? When you hear me say ancestral legacy, I'm speaking of all of that. I'm speaking of the people of European ancestry that helped those enslaved Africans to be engaged in the creative process. I'm speaking of those Asians that we tend to overlook and call either Indian or Native Amerindian. There's a lot of terms, and we tend to overlook it in that space called Maroon sanctuary lands. It has a name. Maroon sanctuary lands. There's a lot of this legacy that is still going forward and actually allowing each and every one of us to have a certain space of respect. So it's not like you have to look down on what transpired during the period of enslavement or colonization, but to actually focus to like shift the focus from the horrific nature of that to the focus of how powerful, how resilient, how engaging these people were. The caveat to that third point, and I want to make sure that I highlight that, is that it's a lot of the literature that we've gathered, we tend to only depend on the Danish archival record. And not many of us speak Danish. So we're very dependent on the idioms that are shifted in the translations of these Danish archival records. Or if we're fortunate, we may find something that is done in German, we may find some things that are done in Norwegian, we may, in the language of the people of Norway more specifically, we may even find some things that are in Spanish. We find a lot of documents that have been translated into Spanish. So for some of us, that's a little bit easier to work with, and certain times French. However, we have a number of historians, a number of social scientists that have been giving us a wide array of information that is very, very important, very significant. However, the oral narrative, that oral legacy, that's the part that many of us tend to not include in some of these conversations when we talk about the Maroon sanctuary lands and the legacy connected there. So I want to speak to that in these last few moments of my sharing here. So it's really important to listen to the songs. A lot of the griot teachings that come up around the Maroon legacy are so rich and so full. We just sit and go down the road and dance to them. But sometimes if you really take a moment and still your mind and listen to some of these songs that are coming from persons like Stanley and the 10 Sleepless Nights, and I have to always give my credit. I think of Blinky, McIntosh, granted as an ancestor, but there's so much in their lyrics about this legacy of what took place in Northside. You know, we talk about Queen Mary, but we overlook that Queen Mary was one of a multitude of women and men that impacted this whole region that we talk about when we speak of the fire burn. So when you speak of the Maroon legacy, you got to remember that there were Maroons even after 1848. There were persons that, although they were connected to working on particular plantations by contract, that they still chose, instead of living in the towns of Frederickstead or Christiansted, or even in the Kings Hill area, they chose to be in the country and to be in those spaces where they felt more sovereignty, which is what is everyone's ancestral right, to be sovereign, right? So there's a lot of conversation, and again, remember there was a shift from what took place during the enslavement period, and yeah, it was emancipation, but people weren't really free. People were still tied to the land. People were, and not tied to land that they owned, but tied to land that belonged to other people. And the exceptions, because even free Africans chose to go and engage and worship and fellowship with people that were so-called Maroons. So Maroons are not only escaped Africans who were enslaved. It's a whole mindset of moving in the direction of not just being runaway, but actually being sovereign, right? And so there's a different conversation, and again, because of and this is something that I can share at another time, or when we're doing things at the university, I can give a lot more specificity and detail to, but just for the purposes of what we're doing right here, 15 minutes, right? Okay, no, I just want to make sure I stay within, right? Because I get excited. I think you can tell I get really excited. You know, there's a number of places on Northside that people may go to. Like they'll say, I went to the tide pools. And I always tell persons, when you go to the tide pools, make sure everything you carry with you, that you bring it back. Because a lot of persons, and I've done that with my family, my children, etc., and just my students, will go there and we end up doing like a beach cleanup. Because persons forget, you can't leave your water bottle, you can't leave your sandwich wrapper, you can't leave your child's diaper, especially full of soil material. That's not really nice and pleasant in a space that's so sacred. Yep. So we've been really kind of enforcing this type of a connection to environmental awareness when we go to these sacred spaces. The importance of that space too is that we learn a lot about the sustainability engineering that these Maroons had knowledge of without using all these very affluent types of engagements or terms that we use in the 21st century, right? They knew how to recycle. Because if they didn't, we would have found mounds and mounds and mounds and mounds and mounds and mounds and mounds of trash, like what we're suffering with now in the 21st century. But they knew how to recycle. They knew how to place things. They knew the difference between where they would bury someone, where they would birth someone, where they would rest their head, and where they would worship. Very different. And they were very clear not to put chicken farms in areas that would contaminate the water below them. Do you get my drift? Things that we tend to overlook in our current 21st century engagements. The closing point I want to highlight is that importance of persons recognizing that the ancestral legacy of persons that have multi-generational ties to St. Croix has a lot to do with persons that, yes, may be born here. However, it's the work and I think you felt what I'm saying. That spiritual energy of this is home, and this is where I'm going to give my contribution, and this is where I'm going to respect and protect this particular legacy. I want to contribute to the cultivation of the heritage and the longevity of this very, very powerful space. So when we think of the Maroon Sanctuary place, I would like persons to no longer think of just, rabble-rousers, people that just want to start trouble, runaway enslaved Africans, but it was an entire civilization building kind of space. And people were able to go to those spaces and come and go. There was a lot of migration, there was a lot of mobility in those spaces. And many times the documents that we're reading do not really provide that kind of information. There are a number of spaces that are very hallowed in that area where there are still human remains. So there's been a quest, if you will, and I would be remiss if I did not include my beloved cousin, Professor Olasi Davis, who has done a lot of things with the St. Croix Hiking Association, with the University of the Virgin Islands, particularly in Cooperative Extension Service, and just as an ethnobotanist and a published author of a zillion different essays around the preservation of spaces here in the Caribbean. And in that conversation, it allows us to speak to in volumes about the importance of just respecting sacred space and really protecting sacred space. So when you hear a person saying that there are different organizations that are trying to buy land in that area just so that it can be preserved into perpetuity, that's all it is. We're attempting to not see a golf course be built on an area where we know there are human remains and where there are footprints of where our ancestors walked and traversed and contributed, right? We would like at least those 4,000 acres, give or take, that at one point the government of the Virgin Islands had the opportunity to secure, but again, the world being as it is, it didn't happen. However, just because you cannot physically get in there in certain areas, we still have virgin forests in that region. We still have areas that have the caves. You can see where you can actually see the imprint of hands where people were actually creating caves in the soil, right? You have areas where we have found the remains of even infants that obviously were in those areas and did not survive that journey. And we also see the footprints for areas where persons were building items so that they could actually go across the water. And that particular publication provides some detail to those, like connecting who escaped from which particular plantation, where they disappeared to, and that we ended up finding them in Puerto Rico, making that transition into Catholicism so that they could be free, right? So the Maroon legacy is a very deep one, very empowering one, and I just want to kind of close with that and just ask that we acknowledge the importance of recognition of the people of native, indigenous, African ancestry right here in St. Croix in these beautiful places of the Maroon Sanctuary lands. Thank you very much. Do you have any questions? Yes.
Yeah, you mentioned a very important point that a lot of these places are sanctuaries. I hear people say they go into pools all the time, so, and they aren't really signed. So what is there that maybe organizations that you are involved in or the government, what are they doing to try to bring awareness to the community that these are in fact sanctuary areas and to leave it the way that you saw it?
Well, excellent question. So I'll speak on behalf of Succeed, right? And in that capacity, there's a Succeed is a coalition of about 40 different not-for-profit organizations in St. Croix.
How many?
That about 40.
40?
Yes, right. And it may have increased because some organizations have actually split into other new groups with a particular focus. However, when we started with about 12, and then it expanded to 40. We were able to get support from the Department of the Interior to do exactly what you're speaking of. So we did do some signage, which Maria did her thing. So we're navigating the next layer of how we can at least put up some way markers and certain strategic spaces. We're working with these same organizations so we can at least explore ways to have it so that it's like on the main road, and that way people are aware from when they're on the main road. Keep your trash in your car from the main road. And then by the time you get up to the top of the bridge, we can also have a similar type of signage on the various heritage pathways. And there's a number of organizations that are at least more aware. I mean, with Caramoa being closed, open, sort of something, people just go through the back route. So that became another issue because it's access. Some people are still driving down in 4x4s, which you can do, but there's certain areas where you shouldn't drive because because you are actually going over historic sites. You're destroying archaeological research sites. So we've been working on getting the signage returned. So thank you for that question. Yes.
Certain areas like Mexico, as an example, have similar sites, and they have monetized these sites. And Chichen Itza, what's your view on monetizing some of these sites?
I am never afraid of money. So I agree that there should be some degree of like an entrance fee to getting access to especially the sites around the virgin forests, especially around the sites where we know that there are human remains, where people shouldn't even walk in that area anyway. So we're currently working with not only the Smithsonian Institution, specifically through their National Museum of African American History and Culture, to kind of explore how we would navigate that, because that's something they seem to be really good at. But we also work with the Society of Black Archaeologists, so that when we do find out where these sites are that are very super sensitive, that we can have the right instruction and guidance. We've also reached out to the Department of Commerce so that we can at least navigate, like, what would it look like? Would it be kind of like Cinnamon Bay, St. John-ish? You know, would it be like Megan's Bay, St. Thomas, you know, so that when you're coming in, you actually pay an entry fee? Or would it be that only certain people with a particular identification marker, some type of, that they're the friends of the sanctuary lands? I'm not saying that's the name, but I'm just saying that they would actually make a contribution, because it costs money to maintain. It costs money to clear those pathways. And it costs money to make sure that people don't leave, because people will leave trash. Because some people go down there and they act like it's just like public works cleans down there. And so they leave things, and it does take time. So I would definitely welcome whatever suggestion you would offer, or anyone that would offer in terms of how we can do that in a very more productive and equitable way. Thank you for that question. Yes.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. The question is kind of along those lines.
anything else
Two
we can get you to
related
try?
question. One, how do you feel about the push to make, I think it's all of St. Croix a heritage land based on what the Congressman is currently looking at? And two, how are you going to balance or navigate that designation with the fact that it is going to cause inflation, right? Because if you can't develop, that means the lands that are developed are going to spike. I know you have an issue where people might be pushed out at identification. So how do you feel about those 2 points?
Okay, so let me give the disclosure, because I helped do some of that development around the National Heritage Area, which is very different than being an invasion on the economic development marker. So I want to highlight that. And I would encourage, again, and I can email it to the president so that you can actually look at that NHA sustainability report, because you will see that it's a sustainability report, and the intention was not to create the inflation of what you're referencing, and it was also to ensure that there was a sustainable economic development structure that actually girded underneath anything that was done with that NHA. And this is going back, it's been over a decade. There was actually, Succeed was actually selected through a competitive process as the manager of this NHA, and there's been a whole little political flow of how best we can handle that, because we have to deal with this disaster recovery piece, because that has created a whole new stratum for how we, before it was just to deal with sustainability, environmental engagement, and economic development, and of course the spiritual, cultural heritage requirements that need to be respected. But now, in addition to those four, we've got to deal with this disaster preparedness and disaster recovery and disaster sustainability. It's like disaster, to kind of couch all of that. So I'm definitely in support of an NHA because I've seen it introduce a significant amount of resources into other areas that have that designation. I feel that it would be very challenging because how it started, it was particular sites that were identified for just the Maroon Sanctuary Lands was one of the main sites that was going to be in that form. However, when the federal representatives came from DOI and other agencies, and we started sharing, you know how Persians can, well, you need to see this, and you need to see, and all of that, they started to see the entire 84 square miles is a cultural heritage gem. And so that was the main reason why it went from the smaller spaces to the entire island. So ideally, with the proper thought process, if we do this sustainably, with the mindset of making sure we're aware of climate change realities, global warming realities, this disaster sustainability recovery piece, if we do that comprehensively, then we would definitely have one of the best NHA sites probably in the nation. And we just have to make sure that we do it cooperatively, collaboratively, and of course, for me, it's keeping the respect of St. Croix and the people they meet here at the foundation of that, period. I mean, if you do it like that, then I think we can still get a little bit of both. And the areas that are weak, that's where we're supposed to pull in all these degrees and credentials and certificates that we got and all this training. Let's put it to use, right? Or else it's just paper. Right?
Appreciate that.
Thank you for that question as well. Let me get this. Yes, sister.
My question is twofold. The first one is, where can we get our hands on these types of brochures? That's the first one. And then, because with the Islamic sign, I believe the children are the future. And I do believe that the children are the future. However, how can they be the future if they don't know these things? So my thing is, how do we get this literature, other than just sometimes taking them to the museum, but into our schools to educate them of who we really are? Any idea?
Excellent question. So again, disclosure. So the standards for cultural education here in the Virgin Islands Department of Education, myself and a team within Ankh Incorporated actually were commissioned to do that. So we created like a whole set of the standards, the framework for implementing the standards, the curricular recommendations, and the integration. I cannot speak, I'm not in the Department of Education, so I can only do what they ask me in terms of commissioning. And then several organizations are actually doing a variety of programs throughout the schools. And that's usually by invitation by teacher or principal. The other guest that's here with me, Dr. Zay Johannes, has assisted in many, many ways as an educator, as a griot, as a multi-generational native, indigenous, ancestral African Virgin Islander, right? To be able to deal with the program, check out, don't get upset. C4 sounds very explosive, but it's all about the consciousness, the culture, the curriculum, and the core of how we engage with education. Right, C4, our focus is all around, it started as cruising studies for a particular school. When people saw our proposal, it has gone all over the Virgin Islands. So we're working on being able to implement that and secure the funding to do so. I'm trying to get everybody to
So I want to touch on that before you left.
Okay, go
It's
ahead.
actually being litigated.